perfect. So welcome everyone. We're very happy to welcome you to our second webinar. We're very excited for this webinar because we have a lot of great individuals on our panel, and we look forward to all of you hearing from them and then having a chance to ask your questions. So many of you who participated in the first webinar have already heard this first part of the presentation. So it's a little bit of a review, but we always like to note what we do as an organization. Helen, if you could move forward a slide.
I'm having a few issues. One moment, please. Oh, there we go.
So as always, we like to start our meetings by recognizing the land on which we gather, being the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. So the first part of the presentation is, what is the labor market group? So while most of you already know this, we like to repeat it. We're one of 26 workforce planning areas in the province of Ontario. We're funded by the Ministry of Labour, Training and Skills Development, and we provide a number of labor market related information throughout the year. These include the local labor market planning report. So this is the annual report that we do, typically in Q4. The Employer One survey, which will be launching in January and continue through to the end of February 2021. The labor market summits. So these used to be called the service coordination days, where we'd have a half-day training session for some of our employment service and other partners. In COVID, we've switched it over to an online delivery model, and we've decided to break it up over several webinars instead of being one. In terms of our mission, it's to work collaboratively with community partners on the creation of innovative labor market solutions that meet local workforce development needs. And as a new thing that we just developed over the last few weeks, we've defined our values being caring, respect, quality, and integrity that guide us through everything that we do. In terms of what we do, this may seem very straightforward, but it really is what we aim to achieve on a daily basis or a weekly basis, is keeping a pulse on changes in the labor market. So working with our economic development partners and our employment services and employers to really understand what's happening in the local labor market and how we can best support them moving forward. In addition, we provide accurate, reliable, and timely labor market information on our two focus areas, which is Renfrew County and Lanark County. And we support employers, job seekers, and community stakeholders with their labor market needs. So if any of your organizations have specific information that you would like to seek on the local labor market or questions that you have, feel free to always connect with us, and we will have our contact information at the end of this presentation.
Okay, before I get started on the labor market information, I just wanted to let everybody know that there was some background noise there, so just please double check and ensure that you are muted during this time. And apologies to all of you who've heard this. We are making sure that we get this information across at all of our webinars. So we just want to share a little bit about diversity in the workplace, or as it relates to the workplace, and just a little bit about the demographics and the job postings that we have with all of you to get a sense of the situation that we're in our local labor market. For some reason, sorry, folks. It's not letting me advance. I apologize, everyone. Just give me one moment, please. Let's see if we're working now. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we want to talk a little bit about the population. The unfortunate thing that we have happening in Renfrew and Lanark is that we are not really growing in any way. So across the province and in the nation, we have at least 1% growth, population change. And in Renfrew and Lanark, unfortunately, we are at none. So some notable losses that really impact our local labor market are if we look at under age 5, we can see that we have -3 and -4% in Lanark and Renfrew counties. And this is people under age 5. So what that tells us is that there are not a lot of folks having babies these days. Another significant group is the 20 to 35, those entering the workforce or in the workforce for a little bit there. We have -3% in Lanark County and a whopping -8% in Renfrew County. And also part of the workforce age, those age 60 to 64, is we've got -6 and -8%. So these are really significant losses in the numbers that we're having throughout Renfrew and Lanark, and that's being reflected in the workforce. We just do not have these days the number of people that we need, the number of skilled workers that we need to fill all the jobs that we have. And that may be a surprise to some of you. So when we have low population growth and we're losing a lot of folks out of our counties, we really have to consider, and regardless of this, we have to take a look at the fastest growing populations in Canada. First group we're going to look at is First Nations, Indigenous, Métis, Native youth. So we can see from Stats Canada that this is the projected growth until 2036, and you can see that in all those areas we do have population growth, and it's really important from a labor market perspective and a workforce perspective to really engage youth in the local workforce. And turning it over to Oliver.
And of course, when we turn to our local community, it's important to take a look at the Statistics Canada information that relates specifically to Renfrew and Lanark counties. And indeed, when we take a look at Aboriginal identity in the 2016 census, we find that approximately 8% of Renfrew County and approximately 4% of Lanark County identify as having Aboriginal identity, and this is the definition as per Statistics Canada. In the next slide, we've taken a look at growth patterns. So this is specifically Renfrew County, and we can see the pink line being growth in Aboriginal identity and the white line being growth in visible minority populations. And we can see that the lines are significantly higher than we would than we see in the non-Indigenous population and the non-visible minority population. So it's important to note that while overall the growth of both counties is 0%, only around 500 individuals, these are the two fastest growing demographics within that.
As you all know, during this panel discussion, we are focusing on the second group of the demographic that is fastest growing, and that is newcomers. So we found this excellent little infographic, and it really highlights some of the important ideas and thoughts that are relevant to the local labor market. When we look at newcomers, 80% of the population growth in Canada is international migration. So that is a very significant number. 93% of those immigrants know French or English. 56% are represented in the economic class, and they are 15 to 24% more likely to be working than Canadian residents. And very importantly, I think here to mention is that 93% have a strong sense of belonging to Canada, which is a value that I think we all share. Oh, for crying out loud. All right, an important thing to look at right now. If we look at our job postings, we have a number of areas that we are really lacking the workforce that we need. So in this slide, what it does is it identifies the total number of unique job postings, but also the frequency. So the number on the left in that second column, that if we look at retail trade, that 925 is the number of total job postings, and the number on the right-hand side is the number of those job postings that are actually unique. So in this case, nearly all of those retail employers are posting 2 to 1. So they're posting double, they're posting in 2 areas. And so the number on the right is more significant in terms of those are the unique postings that we have. The other thing that we have to look at is the median posting duration. So imagine needing somebody and having to wait 38 days or 31 days. And this is what we're facing in terms of healthcare and social assistance. We're in a crucial place right now where it is vital. It is vital that we find those healthcare staff that we need in order to perform the services that we perform in the area. So it just gives you a sense of the immediacy, and it gives you a sense of the industries that are really hurting. So these are the top 8 represented. Of course, retail trade, I think that makes a lot of sense to people, but it just reiterates where we are in terms of the local labor market here in Renfrew and Lanark. We need people in healthcare. We need professional scientific technical services, management of companies and enterprises, manufacturing and construction. These are consistently part of that, represent that need in our area consistently, not just through COVID as we're living it right now. And again, that's the same idea in Renfrew County. One of the things we wanted to make sure is that when we're talking about workplace, you know, Shayla did an excellent presentation at our intercultural competency primer in terms of the benefits of diversity overall, but it's really important from a work perspective that we understand that diversity brings differences in styles and in ways of looking at and doing things, which can help organizations do more than they ever dreamed possible. Diversity can help organizations create new and more innovative products and services, better meet the needs of customers and clients, and do more for the community the organizations are part of and serve. Diversity means difference, and differences create challenges. We want to acknowledge that, but differences also open avenues of opportunities. It's really important for all of us to come together as community agencies to support job seekers and employers when it comes to being a welcoming community. Diversity allows for a broad range of ideas to exist in an organization, including views that may challenge workplace norms, focuses and strengthens an organization's core values, and is key to organizational change. We want to promote social, economic, intellectual, and emotional growth throughout Renfrew and Lanark. So if you have any questions, if you need any reports, we want to hear from you. If you have any suggestions on how we can become a more welcoming community, I know all of the people on the line right now have a really good sense of creating a welcoming community, but we're going to have to continue talking and working together in order to achieve this. So I will turn it back over to Oliver.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Helen. So that brings us into the next section of our discussion, which brings us into the actual panel discussion itself. So I'm just going to ask all of our panelists to make sure that your cameras are on. And then I will. Perfect. So I'm just adding everyone as a spotlight. Perfect. So the first part of the panel discussion today is panel introductions. So I don't know if there's anyone specific who wants to start. I think it might be easier to start with the agencies and then move on to our persons with lived experience. So perhaps if Oliver would like to start, just kind of introduce yourself and the agency you represent and anything else you want to share.
Okay, thank you so much, OG, Oliver, and the team for considering representative from Newcomer Centre of Peel for this panel discussion. Just a little about my own journey and the relevance of me being a part of this session. So in 2009, I actually immigrated from Jamaica, as a skilled professional, maybe looking for a better opportunity, a place where my family can, my children can grow up and just have a wonderful life. So we selected Canada. My experiences has been in education. I'm a college administrator, I'm a lecturer. But since being in Canada, I've actually transitioned to the not-for-profit sector, where I've managed several mentorship projects in Toronto, in Hamilton, Mississauga. These are both face-to-face mentoring, online e-mentoring, pure e-mentoring, mentoring for settlement services, employment services, and entrepreneur. Over the last 5 years, I have been employed at Newcomer Centre of Peel, which is located in Mississauga, as a project coordinator for the Rural Employment Initiative project. Newcomer Centre of Peel, we are a settlement service organization, and on an average, yearly average for the past 5 years, we serve approximately 15,000 newcomers. And we assist the entire family from youth, parent, and of course, the job seekers in terms of settlement, and the top of it all in terms of employment support. So I'm a part of the employment department, and my project specifically, the Rural Employment Initiative, which I deemed the acronym being REI. This project is really about connecting our job seekers with employees and other stakeholders outside of the GTA. We see ourselves as a conduit allowing newcomers to relocate from the GTA to rural communities, communities where newcomers do not normally consider settling in. When we decide on immigrating to Canada, we think about coming to Toronto, or one of the largest cities. So through the REI project, we're able to help newcomers to think outside the box, to recognize that there's life outside the big city. So that being, we collaborate with the Economic Development Departments, the Labor Planning Board, and other stakeholders and employees, of course, along with other stakeholders in the community who have some form of direct relation with attraction and retention of newcomers to the communities. The newcomers we see are, their professions vary, whether they are engineers, accountants, teachers, medical professionals, and the list continues. These our clients tend to be highly educated, several degrees. Their language levels are normally Canadian language benchmark level 6 and above. That's one we process for employment. And so, oftentimes they have expressed the interest of going just about anywhere in Canada where they're able to find a job. We are not only working with the newcomers to find employment, but we are also working with communities to develop attraction and retention strategies. And we have seen the impact of what we do in several communities where we have taken busloads of clients to actually view these communities close up, as well as we have invited those community stakeholders to be a part of webinars to kind of share with our clients as to what it's like to be in their community and to market the communities to newcomers. And so we are working with communities, for example, in hosting job fairs. So we bring the entire community to Mississauga to market themselves. And to me, that's one of the big outcome of our project, where we are able to get a lot of companies outside of the GTA to under one roof, where they're able to connect with newcomers to really share information that perhaps would not have been possible through this through our program. Other than employment, we also offer diversity awareness training, because that's one of the big questions newcomers ask about. Right. So Newcomer Centre of Peel as an organization, we are actually working with immigrants to really get settled, and to be settled, a newcomer really needs to find employment. And so that's why we are really happy that we can be a part of this workshop to share our experiences, and with the hope that it will we can all learn from the experience, that so our clients, newcomers on a whole, can benefit. Right. Thank you so much for having us.
Excellent. Thank you, Oliver. Lori, would you like to introduce the YMCA and its programs?
Thanks, Oliver. Hi, everybody. I'm Lori Beckstead, and I am from the YMCA in Ottawa. And I'm the director of a primary research project called Trades Talent Link, and I'm funded by IRCC. So what we're looking at is we're examining a skills gap between skilled trades employers and newcomers. And we've been at this since July of 2018. So we've got some preliminary findings, but our project will wrap up at the end of this fiscal, so March 2021. We've been doing some activities along the way in terms of changing perception and looking at an employer's expectations and a newcomer's expectations of the trade sector. So we're not just looking at construction, we're looking at all four sectors. Obviously in Ottawa, we have a high concentration of construction, and so that tends to be the largest percentage of who we're dealing with. What else are we doing? Well, we have our Newcomer Information Center, which helps newcomers as they arrive and get settled in Canada. And our great staff over there do a lot of work with our settlement workers as well. They help with paperwork. They, point newcomers to resources within the community. We also have, I belong to a work group called the Newcomers in Trades Programs. So in our programming, I guess our flagship program is our Power of Trades program that started back in 2011. And this is a pre-employment program, so it's workplace readiness. And it's introducing newcomers to the idea of skilled trades as a career. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later in answer to some of the panel questions. The other thing we have is we have two pre-apprenticeship programs that we're really proud of. We have a home renovation pre-apprenticeship, and we have a horticulture and landscaping pre-apprenticeship. The home reno started as newcomer focused and has since expanded. We now have 55 participants this year. It's been a little challenging to get that one off the ground this year. It took a while to even get us into the classroom, but they're there now and they'll finish up in March. Our horticulture program ran virtually this year. Sounds a little strange when we're dealing with plants and stuff to be doing it virtually, but it worked really well. We also have a pre-arrival program called Build On. And the idea of that was to connect those with an interest in coming to Canada with the idea of the skilled trades. And then once they were approved for entry, that we could start doing some career prep with them ahead of arrival. So those are the programs that we're currently running. I guess a little bit about myself would be helpful too. I have a background in residential construction. I worked in the sector for quite a while. And then I went on and I was teaching, I developed and taught a communications and skilled trades course for one of the colleges, Eastern Ontario colleges, and I taught there for about 8 years. And then I came to the Y and I've been doing what I've been doing for the last few years. So I think that's about it, Oliver.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lori. Shayla, would you like to introduce yourself and the Community Settlement Initiative?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation, Oliver and Helen. It's a delight to be here with everyone today. And thank you for joining us from Peel and Ottawa. What a wonderful panel so far. I'm so excited to meet the remaining members. But myself, so I've been had the great fortune of building the local immigration partnership in Renfrew and Lanark in 2011. And I'll never forget my very first day at work. It was an empty office, a contract, and go. And when I started to make my calls to my colleagues in the local immigration partnership network across Ontario at the time, I asked where to begin. And every one of my colleagues said, start with the settlement agency in your area. And we didn't have one. And so it was an incredible journey of collecting partners who really had such a willingness to build a more welcoming community, obviously pointed to from the economic development challenges, workforce shortages, but ultimately these partners rallied, came together, and we wrote a strategic plan in 2012 that really started to shape today's work. And this particular one pillar of our strategic plan is called Service Provider Readiness. And I'm so proud of this particular initiative because I see many people on the call today who are part of our founding LIP partnership table. And they developed this solution because what we learned in our consultation up front in the LIP was that many agencies, community groups, employers were willing to serve new Canadians, hire new Canadians, but not necessarily able to because of a lack of lived experience, local training opportunities, and of course, that necessary function of a settlement agency for expertise and supports ongoing. So we started to build out some really cool tests, and this is what really brought us forward to achieving also an innovation stream grant similar to Lori's at the YMCA. Through the service delivery improvement mechanism. And so what we did was we started working with private sponsorship groups. We had 17 groups actually mobilized across the region. So for those from our neighbors in Ottawa and Peel, we have 24 communities in Renfrew and Lanark, 10,000 square kilometers, and not one of those communities is over 17,000 in population, and our smallest is 300 people. And so when we think about this spread of geography and all of these things, we knew that this urban model of settlement delivery is not likely to be effective here. And so we started blazing trails about what is rural settlement and how do we create welcoming communities in places without public transport, without settlement agencies, and all of the other features of an urban-centric model. So trailblazers is the term I like to use, but definitely learning as we go was the practical way to say that. And so what we learned right away was these sponsorship groups were supporting English language development in their church basements. And so we mobilized a decentralized model where we would coach these volunteer English language instructors on pedagogy, targeted training for listening if you wanted to get to know how to speak to your child's teacher, any sort of practical learning tools. And, you know, with less than $80,000 a year, we were able to create 65 learning locations that were supported by an ESL professional and volunteer driven, where only 2 classes existed before. So this model allowed us to move forward into an Ontario provincial agreement before, when the immigration ministry was still a thing. And we were able to pull together 2 years of broadening this service delivery model to all newcomers, not just Syrian language learners. And then that evidence really led us to establishing our current project called the Community Settlement Initiative, which I'm leading right now. So the idea of the Community Settlement Initiative is that we believe that the community must own settlement and integration rather than the settlement agency itself, and that our focus was on ability to serve, to recognize the unique needs of newcomers, to recognize our own bias and attitudes around visible minorities, persons of different cultural appropriateness, and then also the skills to serve those unique needs and the awareness or the knowledge of help and support outside of my organization. And so these 4 categories of influence we targeted towards allies. We refer to them as allies in settlement, employers, community groups, and service agencies. And so we are now well into 2 years of our data collection and service to challenge this research question. And we've served over 600 clients, allies, through indirect supports. So this could go from a microcycling of coaching appointments where you're working with one newcomer client and you want to work through this case, one step at a time, working together with my team. Or it could be organizational presentations. It could be welcoming policy review, interview question reviews, all these kinds of services we started to pull out. And of course, my team are all licensed intercultural competency trainers through our training partner in London, through Western University, and a partnership with a settlement agency there called London Cross-Cultural Learning Centre. And so this entire project and my commitment to welcoming communities reflects this deep involvement and rising of capacity of all people in small places. And I think that, to put an analogy on it as I wrap up, is that we hope to inject dots of capacity in all of the communities that surround and all the places that surround a newcomer in a decentralized way, so that those dots of capacity bleed into pools. Many prepared agencies, many prepared neighbors, many prepared volunteer organizations, and then eventually this will saturate the 10,000 square kilometers of region that newcomers are living in here. And so that is really what we're up to. Similar to Lori's timeline, we are wrapping up in March, but we have learned that this approach not only tackles the rural barriers of transportation and centralized services in a major center, but it also transfers the ownership of settlement outcomes to the community itself. And that this is a fundamental principle of the resourcefulness typical of rural areas and the neighborly love typical of rural areas. So we are just leveraging these strengths and optimizing the human contribution all day long. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Shayla. Louisa, if you could introduce yourself and give you a little bit of background on what you bring to today's discussion and what you're going to share throughout.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm pleased to meet every one of you. My name is Louisa Cunha. I'm a newcomer in Canada, and last year I completed my master's in sociology at the University of Ottawa. So what I'm going to talk a bit about today is, of course, my own background, but also talk a bit about what I study in university, because I focus on studying about trajectories of newcomers. And I think it's relevant also to show what I learned in my research in my master's. So for a bit about myself, I was born in Brazil. After finishing my bachelor in business, I started to think about where I wanted to live and about my future. And my partner and I started to think about the possibility of coming to Canada. Canada sounded such a lovely idea to come here, and Canada sounded like a welcoming place, a safe place where we could start our lives as a couple. So we got here in 2017. I started my MA program. I was on a student permit. My husband had a work permit, and like many other immigrants, we faced some unforeseen challenges in the labor market, some things that we are not expecting, but we are now both working towards our goal to establish ourselves here in Canada. During my academic life, in Brazil, I focused on studying about labor market inclusion in the workforce, also diversity management, theories of gender, oppression, and race. And the integration into the labor market was something that really spoke to me, And it's also a very important research field here in Ottawa, here in Canada and Ottawa as well, so I was drawn by that subject. And I think one important thing to highlight is there's a great contradiction between jobs available and the immigrants' professional background. Some people may call this killing. So as we were talking, like some jobs are available in construction, agriculture, food services, trades, but the federal immigration system, they favors immigrants with high levels of human capital, high levels of education qualifications and work experience, regardless of the labor market gaps. And sometimes newcomers may expect to find employment in their desired fields, but they might not be able to do that due to various reasons, including the long and bureaucratic process of validating diplomas, the dismissal of degrees obtained outside of Canada. Some people may not consider hiring people that studied outside of Canada. The requirement for Canadian experience that some immigrants might have to take longer to get in the labor market because of some employers may require Canadian work experience. Also, there are some biases against foreigners, like biases against their looks or the way they talk or cultural background. So in that situation, immigrants may be frustrated and unable to use their full potential, and they often have to work in areas which they didn't have the intention to work. So on that point, I'll just give an example of a person I met. I think it's a really important example to illustrate this issue and to reflect, I guess, on how we can better support immigrants. So I met a newcomer woman. She came with her husband in 2017. She was a nurse back in Brazil, and she completed a PhD in the United States. And she came here to Canada. She was able to get her residency through the provincial immigration program because Ontario needed more healthcare professionals. And the only two options for her to work as a nurse was either to validate her diploma, that would take around 2 years, or to start another nursing school from the beginning. And to her knowledge, there weren't any schools in Ontario or in the area that offered in Ottawa or close to Ottawa region that offered a program where internationally trained professionals could be prepared to work in the field. And once she got here, she realized that the process of validating the diploma would take longer than expected. And both this woman and her husband were struggling financially, working in low-paying unskilled jobs as a dishwasher and grocery clerk. But after a year of working as a dishwasher, she found a job as a personal support worker. And so last time I talked to her, back in March, she told me even after investing all this time and a great part of her savings in Canada, she and her husband were not even sure if they were going to stay or if they were going back to Brazil. I think so. This example demonstrates how talent can be wasted. It could be a great loss to Canada and to the couple if they do decide to go back. And I think that we have to think of solutions to support those newcomers and also try to offer a clearer and faster path for her, for example, to become a nurse, to be able to work as a nurse here. And so considering all of that, for my final research paper, I studied about the inclusion of immigrants in the workforce, more specifically how Brazilian men and women engage their social connections to overcome barriers and find employment in their desired fields of occupation. And I interviewed several individuals. I got information about themselves and their couples, and their partners, because both came as couples. And also analyze the challenges they face in the professional trajectory. So yeah, in this panel discussion, I'll share a bit about my own personal experience. I'll also share some of my research findings because I think it's very relevant. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to have a great discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Louisa.
Thank you.
And our final panelist is George. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, so my name is George. George Guffellin, if you want to go formal there. So as you can tell, I'm a newcomer to Canada also. I've been in Canada around 6 years now. I arrived on the 16th of January 2014, stepped off the plane into one of Toronto's worst blizzards in the last 50 years, and then begged their hostess to let me back on the plane, but unfortunately it was too late. So there I was in Toronto, trying to find my way to Ottawa. So firstly, I just want to say Canada is the most welcoming, beautiful place I've ever been in my life. And I'm so glad I made the move to Canada, because it was something that was a big change. I'm very close to my family, so to say goodbye to them and move halfway across the world was a big challenge. I found Canada to open its arms and welcome me greatly. And the sad truth is, I know that's not the experience that everybody's had. So that's one of the reasons I was really keen on being part of this panel today, was just to show that there is a different experience for each and every individual immigrant that comes to Canada. So a little bit about my professional life, as I don't want to take up too much time away from the panel questions. I've been with Community Futures for about 3 months now. So Community Futures operates 267 not-for-profit offices across Canada that provide small business services to people living in rural communities. So each office delivers small business loans, tools, training and events for people that either want to start, expand, franchise or sell their business. So it's been a great opportunity to really get to know a lot of the local community, which again, as an immigrant, really helps solidify my place here within Canada. So again, I have some interesting stories to share with you, some experiences, some positive, some not so positive. But again, these are things that would be a great opportunity for you to ask me about my experiences. And I will say I'm an open book, and I will be very upfront and honest about what it's like to be a newcomer in Canada. So Oliver, at that point, I'll hand it back to you so that we can continue.
Excellent. Thank you, George. So our first question might be a good one for George to start on, or maybe Louisa or one of our other panelists. But the question is, why did you choose Canada? And what were your first experiences in Canada, whether good or bad?
Perfect. I don't mind going first on that one. So for me, it was a journey of love that brought me to Canada. So I actually met my husband in 2008 while he was living in Scotland. So by 2013, his temporary visa was coming up for renewal. And we sat and had a frank conversation. He said, we can either go down the route where we extend my visa, or how would you feel about coming to Canada with me? So his parents are significantly older than my parents. He was a later life baby, and I was a pleasant surprise at the beginning of adulthood for my mother. So we have very different family dynamics. So after a long discussion, we decided with Sam's age and parents, it would make most sense for us to be close proximity to them. So in 2013, we started the process for immigration. And then about a month into it, the immigration office went on strike, which delayed everything. So by September 2013, that's when I was granted the permanent residence visa, and we began the process of moving. And as I had mentioned, we arrived in January 2014. Again, I was just blown away coming from Scotland. We're such a historical country that everybody knows, but we're such a tiny, tiny little country compared to Canada. So for me, my first experience to Canada was just the sheer vastness and the volume of people in Canada. It was kind of overwhelming at first, but absolutely beautiful place, as I've mentioned. And being part of Renfrew County has really opened my eyes to, for lack of a better expression, how much of God's country Renfrew County really is. It's a beautiful spot, and I would encourage anybody that was thinking about moving to a rural community to certainly consider Renfrew County. Thanks.
Thanks, George. Any of our other panelists have anything to share? Louisa?
Okay, yeah, so I'll just share bit about the main reasons I came to Canada. Also, most of the interviews mentioned this. Most of them mention security. As we all know, Canada is a very secure place, a very safe place, and people often want to come here to start their families. And in comparison to Brazil, Canada is a much safer country. Also, corruption, just the general perception of corruption in Brazil makes people very frustrated with the federal government, and Canada has much better reputation in terms of corruption, in terms of services working well. So these were the main two reasons myself and other people would mention. And yeah, so I think on my answers, I will focus more about my research and just not to be too repetitive, but just focus on the theme of information, access to information, and social connections. So I think that my first positive experiences were that generally people were very polite, very friendly. That was really surprising. Yeah, it was really good to see that, and how services worked well, and how the city was properly maintained, and how things seem to function properly. And I think that one of my main challenges I faced to settle was the access to information, to things that seem very basic. For example, renting an apartment, the distance between people, like for example in Brazil, people talk closer to each other. So these are like small things that you have to learn when you're here. And also, for example, taking the bus. When I was first taking the bus, I thought I should wave to the bus. And then when the bus came in, I entered the bus. And when I wanted to leave, I didn't know that I had to press the door to open. So I was kind of lost there. So I think that those little things that seem very basic to all Canadians, navigating the school system, applying for a master's, these things that may seem easy to people, it's very important for newcomers to know. And for myself, I struggle with that too.
Does anyone else on our panel have anything to share? Oliver.
Okay. So I decided to make Canada home in 2007 after traveling to Canada perhaps for 4 consecutive summers on vacation. As a teacher, you get four months vacation in Jamaica. So I just pack up at the end of June with my wife and one of my daughters then, and we just come to Canada. We had a wonderful time spending thousands of dollars. And then basically, you know, in a very good job in Jamaica, you know, perhaps maybe the top job in the community colleges. And then based on just social happening, we decided, let's come to Canada to make Canada home. And I find Canada it was just so welcoming during those visits. And one of the things that struck out, all reflect on, the consistency of how people drives on the road. You know, I'm not talking about, you know, those who break the law, but there's a consistency in terms of if the traffic lights are out, you know, first come to the intersection, you know, go through first. In Jamaica, the entire intersection will be blocked for hours until some police officer comes to clear it. And just navigating the streets, you've got to be very skilled if you've traveled to Jamaica. You know, so that's one of the things that really impressed me. Among other things, you know, the cleanliness of the place and the fact that I was able to kind of be on the streets at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. going inside my apartment. And so we decided, because of some of that factor and other factors, to make Canada my home. And arriving in Canada, you know, after a few months, it took me about 3 months to realize that I cannot spend money the way I spent it when I was vacationing, and that $1 is really a lot of money. You know, in Jamaica, you just spend big sometimes. But here I got to count. I had to count the pennies after many months, especially when there was no job. One of the things I didn't do in Jamaica for many months was to take the bus, because I was somewhat scared of you know, how the drivers would operate on the buses. Come to Canada, the day I arrived in Canada, I had a brother here who gave me a car, so I've been driving. And when the car was not working or when it wasn't available, I would literally stay home. I would never go on a bus because of just my experience on public transit in Jamaica. And it took me literally about 6 months before I actually went on a bus, you know, which was a beautiful experience, you know. But there are many challenges that I faced, really. You know, I'm not in perhaps in education now the way I want to be, because there's this thing about digital global citizenship. And for me, who believes that I'm very skilled in technology, being in an interview and someone says to me, "Oh, you do not have the technical skills or that global competence in technology to be able to work," it you know, I really felt you know, as if to say, "Wow, I'm in the wrong place," you know. But later, I kind of learned just the way of different hiring practices. Sometimes there are biases, sometimes, and there are other issues, which is really a part of a newcomer's journey. But on a whole, it has been a wonderful experience, and I've been able to utilize the skills that I've experienced throughout my profession to transition to, for example, not-for-profit sector, where I'm not teaching, but I'm offering training. I'm not providing academic counseling, but I'm providing employment counseling, right? I'm not doing like what you call now, recruiting external examiners, but I'm recruiting, I'm connecting with employees to assist our client. So it has been a wonderful journey, and you know, through the discussion, I'll be able to share some of those experiences that I've had with newcomers and employers that can benefit the panel. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And do either of our other two panelists have any things that they'd like to share from their experiences? And of course, we could move on to the next question as well. I think Oliver's, what you just were saying is a great segue into the next question, which is, what are the greatest barriers to employment that newcomers experience? So I don't know if anyone would like to start on that one.
I would be happy to go again, Oliver, for sure. So, echoing the sentiments from the other panelists, it can be very frustrating when you arrive in Canada and you have lots of industry experience or lots of educational experience. For myself, I found when looking for employment, I would hear a common answer back from employers when I would hear back from them. And it would be that I had great experience, but I lacked Canadian experience, and maybe get in touch 6 months to a year later once I'd received some Canadian experience, which to me, I found it very much a catch-22. Is here I am, desperate to work, looking for employment, and I'm being told I need to get Canadian experience, but I can't get Canadian experience until an employer takes a chance. So I felt I was chasing my tail a lot. So when I arrived in Canada, I had around about 8 years of financial services management experience. I also have an educational background in counselling and psychotherapy. And my very first job I found was working the morning shift at Tim Hortons from 7 to 3, because Tim Hortons at that time was the only employer willing to take a chance. And funnily enough, 3 months after that, a lot of the employers that I had reached out to before all of a sudden became interested, because I had a Canadian employer listed on my resume at that point, which led into a position in payday loans. So it really was an industry that was similar to my experience, but not really what I wanted to be involved in. So I started off there as they would call them tellers, similar to a bank teller, and then moved into management. And funnily enough, when I was looking to hire a new employee, I came through a batch of resumes, and you kind of get blind to resumes after a while when you're reading them, because it's all very the same formula that they're following. But then I was reading one, and then I saw Hillhead High School, which is a high school in Glasgow, and it took me a second because that was normal to think about that high school for me. And then I realised that I was looking at another Glaswegian's resume. So I reached out to her and asked her about her experience, and she was facing the same problem as that I had faced when I had arrived. She was a bookkeeper and an accountant for a publication in the UK, but then couldn't find anybody willing to take a chance on her in Canada. So we had a long, frank conversation that covered everything from childhood experiences growing up in Glasgow to coming to Canada and how we were finding it. And I was frank and honest with her, and I told her that the position I was hiring for was now the best paying position, but it was guaranteed hours, and if anything, it would give you that first rung on the ladder that you would need to move into the desired profession. So after about 8 months of working with me, she was able to get in with National Geographic and the finance department. But again, it just took that employer taking a chance on a newly landed immigrant and letting them gather up some Canadian experience. It is very frustrating, and I can understand why employers maybe do hold back when it comes to employing newly landed immigrants. That faces a whole host of challenges for the employer, I'm sure. There's cultural aspects, language barriers, experience barriers, educational accreditation barriers. So I can understand where the fear from employers come from, but what also concerns me is how many absolutely fantastic candidates are being overlooked because employers are just too scared to take that initial leap. And I would be interested to hear how the other panellists speaking today found their experience of looking for their first employment in Canada, because again, as I'd mentioned in my introduction, I know that there's no uniform experience for everybody that lands in Canada, and we all experience it different. So I would be very intrigued to find out if my other two panellists here also face the same barriers.
Yeah, I guess I can relate to that as well. I saw very similar barriers as you were mentioning. Yeah, I myself, I'm working an entry-level job. I'm still with the COVID as well, hit us hard. So I'm still trying to redirect and reposition myself in my career. But the barriers I observed first was the education, the disregard for degrees obtained outside of Canada, and the challenges for validating diplomas for a regulated profession. It's really, really hard to validate your diploma in a regulated profession. And immigrants often have to retrain. I talked to some immigrants, they had to retrain. For example, I talked to a person that had a degree in economics. They had to retrain business administration to be able to work in his preferred position. And there's a lack of option for immigrants to bridge that gap, if there is any gap between the education they obtain abroad and the education here in Canada, to be recognized. And I also notice that there's a lot of job seeking strategies that are dependent on social networks, and that's hard for immigrants that when they first got here, they don't know anybody, and a lot of jobs are, especially here in Ottawa, are found through networking. And for those immigrants that first got here that don't know anyone, don't have any people to give references, it's really hard. They don't have the skills, they don't have the soft skills, and they don't know how to network. Yeah, so a barrier for, also there's a barriers for women in particular, because most of the times males have the priority in pursuing their career goals. They use the resources of the family to, the first ones to start studying and spending more time working. And meanwhile, females may take in more housework instead of using that time to invest in their professional careers. So yeah, there was the main barriers that I found in my study, and that relates a lot to George's experience as well.
Oliver, I'd like to maybe say a few words too. That's from the perspective of our research. So we've spent quite a bit of time exploring some of these barriers with employers, looking at it from the employer's perspective, which I think is really important. We hear, you know, George and Louisa, I sympathize with you on this Canadian work experience piece, because it is something that is continually coming up over and over and over again every time we talk to an employer. So we drilled down a little and we said, what is it you mean by Canadian work experience? What is it you're really looking for? In the first year of the project, we did an employer engagement survey with 250 employers in the Ottawa area. And we asked them, you know, if you haven't hired a newcomer, why haven't you? And there were some interesting findings in there, and a lot of it came down to they may not have the work experience we need. So we went back and we interviewed about 10 or 15 of these employers, because you know what, this really intrigues me. I really want to know what an employer means by Canadian work experience. It's really valuable to us at the Y when we're looking at the way that we deal with our clients and our programming and helping them secure work. So one of the things they said, and that I found really intriguing, was, and it just shows a lack of understanding of the immigration system, I think, was, you know what, if they have Canadian work experience, we know they have a work permit. And I was a little bit surprised by that answer at first, and then I got thinking about it and I got, you know, that kind of makes sense. And it sort of relates to the credentialing issues, which I'll talk about in a sec. The other reason is that if they know that you have Canadian work experience, they know that you're probably going to fit culturally into the organization. And this is anecdotal right now, guys. Don't hold me to this one, please. It's not a finding. One of the things that I think when we talk about fit in the workplace is that we put an awful lot of emphasis on the newcomer fitting into the workplace and not the workplace accommodating the newcomer. So yeah, I see you, Shayla. Yeah, exactly. And I think we need to start kind of flipping that around a little bit. I think employers need to become involved in this conversation a little more than they have. So, you know, we rely on newcomers have to take this Canadian workplace culture courses or trainings, and that's really important, and you need to do it to find a job. But what if we flip that around and we say to the employers, and how about you come and take this training that I'm offering, and I'll explain to you how you can do a better job of this. I can explain to you how you can be a more welcoming workplace. And so Trades Talent Link, we're actually, it came about because of COVID. So last summer or last winter, we were offering a workshop to trades employers, and it was called Changing the Face of the Trades. And it is, you know what, guys, I was a woman in construction. So when I talk about changing the face of the trades and understanding barriers that underrepresented groups have in the trades, I'm speaking from that lived experience too. So I said to employers, we had one activity in the training that was really cool where I had job ads, and I put the job ads up on the wall, and I said, what do you think is a barrier to a newcomer applying for these jobs? Because the trades employers tell us we're dying, like we can't find people. I'm running a survey right now. It's our second survey. I don't have enough respondents to be able to give you guys a sneak peek at the results, but what I will tell you is there are jobs, a high percentage of them, that are going unfilled. So we're losing out here. I mean, the Canadian economy is losing out. We're losing out on these good jobs for newcomers as well. So we did this job ad activity with them. And the job ad said 5 years of work experience, but it didn't specify Canadian work experience. And so we got the opportunity to explain to the employers that a newcomer often sees that because of their experiences in the hiring cycle as I haven't got a chance, because they mean 5 years of Canadian work experience. So the employers were really stunned by that. And it changed sort of their perspective on that. And I thought that was the coolest thing to come out of that. We're moving this now into asynchronous online training, and we're about to test it with a group of employers. So maybe in a couple of weeks, I can share the links with everybody so that you can see what we're doing with the employers in terms of changing that perception. The other thing that comes up over and over again with the trades is credentialing. And I know it exists in the other professions as well. When we look at the highly regulated professions, nursing, that Louisa mentioned her experiences with a qualified nurse coming from Brazil, engineering and those kinds of jobs, but it happens in the trades too. So, you know, we need to, in Ontario, we have what's called trades equivalency assessment. And it exists so that someone coming from Alberta or BC, it was a flaw in the Red Seal program years ago where there was no interprovincial mobility. And so they created this T process. And I'm now looking at how can we use that to create kind of an assessment tool that would allow an employer to be able to say, you know, can ask these questions in an interview to determine that Canadian work experience. I think those are the two biggest barriers that I continually see. And that Canadian work experience thing, it makes me want to scream every time I hear it. You know, we're devaluing the experiences and the educations and all the rest of it of our newcomers. And, you know, I think when we talk about education assessment too, and that kind of thing, make sure that you're connecting with your employers, those service providers that are on the call, because they don't always understand what WES is, what credentialing assessment is. They don't understand the expense of that credential assessment for the education assessment for a newcomer. And they, you know what, start educating the employers too, so that they get rid of this mistrust of internationally earned diplomas. We're not the only university or college system out there that delivers valuable education. So I think those are, so I'm going to stop talking because I could talk forever on this stuff. And it's time for me to be quiet and let somebody else have the floor.
I'd love to chime in here if that's okay, Oliver. Lori, take it to the church, you know, like, thank you, woman. Because, you know, I think that, you know, as soon as George started talking and phrased Canadian workplace experience, I immediately said, and so what's the two-way street, right? What is the requirement for the employer to have newcomer hiring experience, you know, and like, where is that competency, right? And so I know, okay, I'm an employer too. You know, what some of you may or may not know is that I also run and own a disruptive strategy community development corp. And so I think that it's really important that we recognize the narrative coming out of employers, like what you're saying, Lori, and I know there's some anecdotes in there, but like, I can tell you that our research and the work that I've done in the Quinte area on their attraction strategy for secondary migrants and the stuff we do in rural communities is that, yes, it is a fear point about not necessarily knowing how to recruit diverse people. And it is all about this fit thing, which is such a misnomer, you know, like the idea of fit. We do want people that are mission aligned to the corporate goal, but the way that we work and the way that we think and the way that we bring forward our talents as individuals, the diversity is the thing to lever, the diversity of thought and approach and all those things. So I'll point to a couple of things before we move on to the next question, but one of the things I'll talk about is we looked at this study called The Power of a Name. Some of you may be familiar with it. It was conducted in the GTA by the partnership between, I believe, the University of Toronto and the University of York. And basically they released 10,000 handwritten resumes to directly connect with postings. And so these were like fabricated people and resumes. And they released 10,000 in very sort of Anglo-Saxon names, John Smith, Brittany Taylor, these kinds of names. And then they released the exact same resumes with like Chinese names, and then again, the same ones in Arabic names. And the data that was returned was that 100% of the John Smiths got interviews. 67% of the Wang Qings got interviews, and 42% of the Mohammeds got interviews. And so what I want to say here is that when I speak to employers, when I look at my own hiring practices, when I look about how we build our teams at the project level, we have to look at what do we have systems and processes in place that monitor for our natural human bias. You know, if you're not familiar with pronouncing a Chinese name, this is just going to seem really abstract to you. It's just going to feel like a fear moment. It's different, it's change, but ultimately, if we slice those names right off the top of the resume and we look at the skills and the pieces below it, there's more of an opportunity, right? So there's a real great best practice that employers can start doing right away to stop connecting familiarity with value. And so that's a piece. But I would also say that one of the biggest pieces of advice that we've gotten great feedback on with our employer supports is about interview questions. You know, tell me about yourself. This is a very common interview question. And if you come from a collectivist society, you might talk about your family and about your kids and about your dreams and aspirations. Coming from an individual society like here in Canada, it's I this and I that, and also credentials, accomplishments, and titles are trained. We're trained to do this, right? To repeat those kinds of things. So even just the forming of that question or asking the question, where are you from? There's kind of this underlying tone of you're not from here. Right. And so we have to be careful with our language and the way that we post and the language we use in postings, the images we use in our employee branding, the questions we pose. And, you know, I deeply invest in our teams in what we call bias monitoring, which is questioning assumptions after the interview. So firstly, we have to accommodate language. So that's one of the things. If your interview panel doesn't have the opportunity to speak multiple languages or doesn't have a background in Spanish or in Arabic, you may need to slow down the interview, put less questions, take more time for clarification so that we're not relying on ease of clarity, like perfect English, to be that pathway to achieving a high score in the responsing. So I think that's also important. But we do a debrief as a team after our interviews to challenge our assumptions, of value, to challenge our expressions of fit, you know, and to really do intentional things to slow down, make deliberate, you know, sort of evaluations of what was heard, and to monitor our own expectations and our own norms as employers, as people on the other side of that interview table. And in fact, we're trying to delete the interview table and figure out ways to assess skill in a practical way that doesn't have all of these artificial constructs of interview settings. You know, interviewing in the trades in a boardroom sounds ludicrous to me, right? So how can we do things that are more disruptive to the norm as employers that feed our ability to sniff out that value for its truth instead of its assumption?
Okay, and Oliver, if I can just pick up from there. I've had the opportunity to connect several newcomers with mentors. And I remember in one mentor, after a meeting with their client, with a mentee, the mentee said, oh, wow, I've been applying for so many jobs and with no response. And when the mentor looked on the resume, he said, okay, you gotta change it. Change the names, change your name completely on the resume. And within a week, He had 4 interviews and he landed a job. You know, so the power of a name is really one of those barriers that many newcomers face in terms of you know, finding employment. And so the whole issue around diversity and educating employers about the differences you know, in newcomers and some of those what they call biases is so important. One of the barriers I wanted to kind of share was the lack of response from employers. The Rural Employment Initiative project that we do, we reach out to employers right through the province, and sometimes employers you know, would contact us and say, okay, we are not able to find suitable skills for certain jobs. And I remember an employer who makes mobile homes reaching out to say, oh, Oliver, we can't find workers. Can you assist? And I would send 3-4 resumes with persons who have the type of skill set based on the job posting, and there'll be absolutely no response from the employer. And so happened that I went to an employer breakfast one morning. I saw the employer and said, what has happened? You have not responded to any of you know, the resumes I've submitted. And he basically said to me, Oliver, these clients are too qualified. They have 1-2 degrees. And if I hire them, they're not going to stay. I said to him, basically, you've got to you reach out that you want the talents. In front of you are persons who are willing to move to your location. They're traveled from various countries to be in Canada. They're not able to find a job in the GTA, and they've said, I want to connect and work with you. So you've got to give the newcomer or the applicant an opportunity to prove himself. And after discussion, you know, the employees, okay, Oliver, send me another resume. And I sent him the resume. And I literally took the client and sat in front of the employer and while he interviewed. And within an hour after leaving there, he offered the client a job. And the client is still working there. It was supposed to be a labor job, but it was really a job that requires skills of an electrical technician. And the client is still working there. So if the silence continues, then we'll always have the statement by some employers that they cannot find the right skills or cannot find anybody to fill those vacancies. So until employers, on the one hand, start to really act on the resumes, especially in cases whereby you're in a remote location, you're far away from you're in an area whereby persons are not normally traveling to your location, and here you have opportunities to kind of tap into skill set in the GTA. Individuals who are competing for hundreds of persons who compete for one job, individuals that are motivated and willing to get out of the big city and come to a smaller community. You've got to really act on the promise you make in terms of you know, filling the positions, because I can say for HRs, it may be more expensive to keep some positions vacant than to fill them. So the lack of silence is really a big thing, a barrier for many of our newcomers seeking a job. And on the other hand, for employers to kind of trust the process and trust the newcomer that if they provide the opportunity and that onboarding, then clients will stay beyond their expectation, because clients are, you know, are learning about the culture of growing into positions within you know, Canadian workspaces.
Thanks, Oliver. So our next question is, what factors did you or your clients consider when moving to a rural community?
Hi, Oliver. Oh, sorry. You can
Go
go ahead, Oliver.
Right. Okay, we're just going to pick up from that, because the question directly relates to the work I do, because our mandate is to promote employment opportunities in rural Ontario. And we often do an intake assessment, and we ask clients, why do you want to relocate? Why do you want to leave the GTA? And they'll put a myriad of factors forward. You know, one, they would say, I want to be in a community where my children can get access to good education and lots of resources, daycare, and similar resources. So that's one of the category that many of our clients identify. They often also speak about inclusion and acceptance. You know, if I relocate to Renfrew County or Thunder Bay or any other community, will I be accepted? You know, how will the community respond to me, right? And we have had you know, shared experience by some of our clients who have maybe given up their job and moved away 9 hours, 17 hours away from the GTA, and because of inclusion and acceptance, you know, they move to a community, and within months, 2 months, they are in a community with no job because of diversity issues within that workplace. And so those clients are by themselves, no employment and struggling, right? So we share with our clients that, guess what? In the GTA, there is issue around diversity and acceptance. Right? As much as the GTA might be a more diverse community, city, you know, clients are still experiencing, you know, barriers to getting jobs because of their names, because of the country they're from, right? But as you move further away, you've got to expect similar experiences. However, you've got to put yourself in a position as well to be able to fit into these communities. When there is a fireworks in the community, you've got to be there to let person that you haven't excluded yourself from the community, but you also want to be a part of it. So we, in a sense, do some amount of you know, diversity awareness training with our clients before they actually move, to let them be prepared to go. At the same time, we are also working with communities in different ways to prepare them to receive our clients. So we can only do an education piece, right? So we do diversity awareness training for communities. We have, you know, because of how our program was structured, we work with Come to Futures Ontario, and MC George is working with Come to Futures. So that was our main partner when this project started. And so we would have gone to the Come to Futures conferences. We were able to meet various communities and offer diversity awareness training. We also do it online for various communities because we've got to start the conversation. You know, we can't change person's attitude by just delivering the workshop. It's really about a conversation that we are able to start. So that is really a big issue with Newcomer. But nevertheless, many of our clients are willing and ready. They would say, once I can find employment, I am flexible, I'm willing and ready to move. And so we have been able to assist clients in moving into jobs and relocating right throughout the province, relatively near and as far as maybe beyond Thunder Bay. You know, communities, Musini, you know. So clients are willing to take the next step, irrespective of you know, some of the barriers. But they want to know that these barriers, there are ways to overcome them, or to mitigate the impact of them, right? You know, I read an article by research work by Remax recently, and it talked about families who move to who are working in GTA, but you know, people move because they're able to purchase houses much cheaper. And having gone to a community, you know, the community did not receive these individuals, and so there's a lot of racist names. You know, it starts by simple things. You know, when a dog poop, you stop and you scoop. that's one of the yards that, the pet would stop, dog would stop, and they would never do it. And it's a consistent pattern. And then a lot of names. So when we read these things, then many newcomers are saying, why should I leave my comfort zone, in the GTA and then move out to a rural community? So those are issues that really needs to be perhaps addressed from a community level. It takes, one company or one other stakeholder within, LIP can't do it alone. It has to be a community effort to really plan to attract newcomers. So those are a few barriers that if we address or try to mitigate the impact of, then we'll have more newcomers moving out.
Thanks, Oliver. Does anyone else on our panel have anything that they'd like to share on this question? Go ahead, Shayla.
Thank you, Oliver, so much. Thank you, Oliver from Peel, for saying these things. I think it's so important that we understand the motivation, and, I think it's so human too, right? Like, we are talking about immigrant newcomers here, but this is also the same for anyone who wants to migrate, right? It's knowing that you will be received and welcomed by the new place. And, I reflect on my own journey. So I'm not from where I live now. I live in a very small town in Renfrew County called Deep River. And I remember the first year I came here and I couldn't find a job in my field at my level for a year. And even then I took like the Tim Hortons level job, the AA position or whatever, to get that local experience. And I think there's this other piece around local. Your last name in a small town, if it's not known, it's different. And so even for myself with long roots here, deep history with my last name, it still took me a very long time to find work commensurate to my skills. So I do think there's this closed mentality sometimes in small communities of, you're not local until you have generational tombstones. And so I think that's a really important piece to reflect here. But the research that I was able to do in the Quinte area this year and last year really reflected sort of this beautiful thing that Oliver was explaining, is that economic opportunity is number one. Right? Everybody wants a good job, and they want a job that's commensurate to their skills, right? Like something that's dignified to the education and value I know I can bring. Bingo. Okay. First thing. But the second thing that we uncovered that's super connected to that is the familiarity of the community. Right? So what you were talking about with pre-arrival, and I think so it's interesting how we look at pre-arrival into Canada, and then there's pre-arrival into rural, right? So these ideas of the workshops that you were offering in Peel and all of the diversity training and these kinds of things of managing expectations, right? And I think that there's this piece that we have to address, is that, yes, we're receiving around 300,000 newcomers a year into Canada, but not every single one of those people came from a massive urban metropolitan area. It's not all Mumbai. There's the rural communities of India, and there's the rural communities of the countries in Africa. There's so many people who do have a predisposition to want to be in a rural place, a small community. So it is about this awareness. How vast is it, right? And I remember interviewing newcomers that live in the GTA, and they felt that Barrie was sort of like equivalent to the Yukon because of the driving, getting up there in the north. And so I think the vastness, the familiarity, the study that we did really reflected that newcomers see Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver in the storytelling of Canada. And yet this is also paired with the imagery of Canada, which is forests, lakes, and trees and rivers. And so there's this weird thing that happens. The newcomers that talk to us said they land in Toronto and they're expecting rivers and lakes and trees. And I remember my partners in the North Bay area, they have a fantastic multicultural center there. And they said they were at a trade fair one time and a newcomer said, okay, I see the lakes and rivers and trees on your banner here, but is that gonna be there when I show up? You know, and it was kind of this is the real Canada I wanted. You know, and I'm not talking down to Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver now, because there are merits to wanting to live in the big cities. But I think this idea of, I might want to live in a small town, but I'm totally unfamiliar with these communities. And I know the Peel Newcomer Fair has done quite a bit of work exposing these communities. But what we learned in the Syrian project that we undertook was that when we compared refugees who entered through the government assistance program, so like the channel of formal, this is the government's bringing you over, settlement workers are going to handle your first couple of months, to the private sponsorship response, which was community volunteers and donors coming together to respond, we noticed the difference right away that actually some of the private sponsors in the Lanark area were so effective at welcoming, backing up the welcoming nature of their messaging, and also delivering on the kindness and friendship that's required to deal with these nuances of getting to know a new place, the unwritten rules, you know, that we talk about or we never talk about. And what we learned was that they were actually attracting their family members into that small community who had come through the government channels into the cities. And because of the, and you know, I'm going to use the term hand holding, but I actually mean friendship, right? That it's actually someone in the host community who is so radically open to receiving these people and helping as a community group to navigate the community, to recognize the opportunities, to fast track understanding how to get around and do things here. That was the secret sauce, people. This friendship with prepared, trained people helped to solidify that retention and integration. And it was well beyond what the newcomer was achieving through formal services. It was well beyond that. It was the backyard barbecue invitations. It was the cups of tea. It was the friendship. And I can't underline that enough. And so this allyship and the idea of that is up to the host community. That is our collective responsibility to engage in this radical openness to other. And I think this applies to newcomers of any kind, regardless of immigrant status. And so that's a big piece here. And I think this familiarity part that we're talking about is a two-way street. Right? We need, as host communities in a rural place, need to be more available to be welcoming and open and capable. And also newcomers need to be educated on what is outside of the MTV of Canada and what else is here. And I think it has to be done in more of a relationship nurturing way instead of a passive way. Because what we know about our study with the private sponsorship groups is that the passive way gets the job done to a point, but is not contributing to retention, long-term feelings of belonging, and that gap is solved by nurturing relationships between host community members and newcomers, and that those relationships are the sprinkles on the secret sauce on top of the ice cream of welcoming diversity. Okay, so it's people coming together that helps to build this third piece, which is the retention. So familiarity and then retention through welcoming communities. This is the three sort of things we learned in our research: economic opportunity, build familiarity with relationships, and secure retention through deeper, more meaningful relationships. Two-way street. Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share on that question about factors moving into rural communities? If not, we can move on to the next question, which is a little more specific. We've heard from many of our employers that they're concerned that while they can offer a job to a newcomer, they can't guarantee its long-term sustainability. What would you say to that employer? And I know we've kind of already touched on it a couple of times through this discussion, But as many of our partners on the line are from employment services agencies or other groups that work directly with employers, what would you suggest that they say to the employers that are concerned about that issue?
Oliver, my response to the employer is, but if you were offering me the job, could you offer that long-term sustainability? And the answer is often no. And so then the question I throw back at the employer is, so what's the difference? You know, like, you're helping with the settlement journey, you're part of the settlement journey, you're creating opportunity, you're doing all of those things. And you need to understand I'm going to shoot myself in the foot, but it comes back again to Canadian work experience. And if you can explain to an employer how they're contributing to that settlement journey, to integration, even by making a job offer for 6, 8, 9 months. I think that's usually the response I've had to an employer when they've said, you know what, I'd love to hire somebody, but you know, they're going to get here and how do I know the job's going to exist in 6 months? Well, at least you're contributing, Shayla, to the community, to building community, right? And I think that's a really great response to give the employer. You know what? Employers aren't big bad boys who are not interested in anything other than what they're going to gain out of hiring that person in terms of revenue or whatever. What they're interested in, you know, if you appeal to that human side and you help them to understand settlement and the settlement journey and the complications that are involved, I think that they start to see it a little bit differently.
Perfect. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share on that question?
Yeah,
Any advice from? Yeah, go ahead, Louisa.
Yeah, saying that theme, I think that's what I learned to being from different countries, that many of the jobs here are not obtained through a formal recruitment process. It doesn't necessarily sending a resume, applying for a job will lead you to get a job. So what I learned and what a lot of people have told me, especially here in Ottawa, there's a lot of jobs through networking. So I think that a newcomer with a well-developed network of contacts who have a much higher employability. So I think that for an employer who is questioning the long-term sustainability of that person, I think that after spending time on the job, workplace are demonstrated places where you find connections and where you build your connections. And if newcomers are given the opportunities, resources they need to grow their network and like establish those relationships, not only in a professional way, but also in for themselves. So establish those relationships as friends, as co-workers. I'm sure they will be able to find jobs, other jobs if necessary, or if they really want, and if they're really well integrated, and if the employer is able to help that integration, I'm sure they'll find other jobs if necessary.
If I may just also add to, I think many newcomers understand, the situation that perhaps, the employment opportunity might not be one that it's fully sustainable. But the thing about it, as we communicate with employers, we in unstable economic situations, whilst a job might be available for 6 months, what happens after 6 months, right? So as long as a newcomer or job seeker in general is willing to take that opportunity, right? They're also taking, taking a chance with their own career, and is willing to also perhaps grow with organization beyond the time period. We have worked with newcomers who want to relocate. Unfortunately, many newcomers will not relocate for part-time opportunities, right? But if they see where getting that job will lead to another opportunity, then they are willing to take the chance. We have had newcomers who have relocated because they wanted experience. And after they've gotten the experience, they have moved on, right? So there are benefits to be had with that employer, even though the job is for a short period of time. You know, the area of healthcare is one of the biggest challenge. Most communities have shared. They can't find PSW. The hospital beds are there, and nobody to be in there because they cannot find the workers. And we have managed to speak with you know, like nurses who have worked in ER, but the sad thing, they do not have a PSW training. That doesn't matter how qualified they are. The sector says you must do that 6 months training before you can work as a PSW. And I've had one client who decided to move and take a job even below a PSW. And guess what happened? She has able to contribute to the community. And not only she went as a single young lady, now she's there with a family. You know, so that's how we sustain and we grow community. So if that employer who perhaps wasn't sure as to where it would go did not give her a chance, then the community would not have benefited, right? So it's really about taking a chance with the job seeker, and also I'm sure although it's not might not be long lasting, the company might not end after the 6 months. There might be other opportunities where the client skills can be also utilized.
Thanks, Oliver. And one thing just for our participants, if you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll probably be able to get through a couple before we finish up today. Right now, I see one question in the chat from a little bit earlier that relates specifically to that credentialing issue. What about newcomers who have high qualifications but are unable to find work, doctors, nurses, teachers? So perhaps if one of our panelists could speak to that issue and its impacts. I know Louisa and Lori both mentioned it a little earlier, but if you could speak to that a little bit so our panelists or our participants can know a little more.
Yeah, so I interviewed for my research actually 2 nurses. And the options they had were to work as a PSW as a nurse. So we started in an entry-level position. And then both of them started to do a college course that I'm hoping to be able to qualify as a nurse technician. So I'll go back a bit. So first they were doing an English training for nurses. When they were at this English training for nurses, they discovered the possibility of working as a PSW. And that was an opportunity that they didn't know about, and it's a occupation that is, it's a hard job, but it pays better than other entry-level positions. So both of them started to work as PSWs. And then after that, they discovered that training to become a nurse technician. And that the training, they could cut a few, fast track a bit because of their previous experience. But it was a long process, and if they are not able to validate their diploma, they would have to go again through the nursing certification again, so they would be able to work in their occupation. And I know that there's the same for doctors. They take a long time to be able to validate their diploma. Sometimes they have to retrain in order to be able to work in the field, and that takes a long time.
If I may comment on that question, as we process you know, our newcomers who want to relocate, one thing we have always shared with them is how can you use your transferable skills. Perhaps you've worked in one industry, but your skill set can be used in so many other industries. And what we have found is that oftentimes many of the jobs we receive from our partners in the various communities, sometimes they're not an exact fit, but the clients have a skill set that can be transferred. And so we guide our clients through that process, that you've got to go in and use those skills. And I often use, when I'm doing an intake assessment, I often use myself an example. I'm able to use my transfer skills in this job. So clients have to be guided in terms of, rather than working, they've always worked in the hotel industry, how can they transfer to those skills perhaps in a restaurant in another industry? So that is really critical as we employees seek to find the right skill set, and employment counselors guide their clients.
Oliver, that's awesome, because we do something similar with our clients where we present it to them as, options. So we need to look at, do we need to look at a career change? Do we need to look at, or a career shift? Can you take some of your related experience and transfer that into the trades? One of the things that the trades suffers from with newcomers is perception. So, we've come a long way in Canada where we don't see these as general labor jobs anymore, low skilled jobs that don't earn a lot of money. And so sometimes, one of the things that we're doing is someone who is an engineer or an architect back home, what we present to them is, here's a real opportunity for you. You can use your transferable skills. These are technical transferable skills that will apply in a construction career, or, as an electrician or as a plumber. And we give them that. And then we let them examine the feasibility of career change, career continued, or career shift. So some of it is just changing perception too, in terms of what we do, because, we do have that focus on the trades here at the Y.
I'd love to chime in on that too. Thank you for that, Lori. I see George wants to speak too. So if you want to go ahead, George, please do.
No. On you go, Sheila. I just have an anecdote that I would like to share before the end of the call. Just on you go. We'll get back to me.
Oh, thank you. So I really just want to make 2 points here. So I think one of the things we have to understand is that the more regulated the job, the harder this is, right? I mean, but it also sits unwell with me when I hear about this sort of classic story of doctors driving Uber in Toronto. And meanwhile, here in Lanark County, I know especially has been spending a ton of time and money on doctor recruitment, right? So it's like, like there's this big cart before the horse challenge, and pardon my slang, but the idea of, if we don't have an immigration system of credential assessment that supports these workforce gaps, and I'm talking, this is a sector gap, this is a huge challenge with doctors in small communities. And my family doctor is a newcomer, Muslim woman who came to the area, who had to jump through extraordinary hoops of retraining to be able to serve my small community. And so I think it's really important that we advocate at a policy level of understanding how this mismatch between the need of Canadian huge sectors like healthcare and the actual system of immigration and how it's preventing these connections from being made. There was a really good attempt in 2015 to do this express entry system that turned out to be not so express. So I think this whole comment on policy is, for us to push up the chain. And I know that the labor market group has a voice of advocacy through their reporting and the collection of this data and bringing it back up to a ministry level. But this conversation needs to happen more often about this mismatch and departments getting together at the federal level on these challenges. But I would suggest that this transferable skills conversation that we're having is super important. I have the great privilege of running a newcomer women in business. It's called Hire Yourself through Kingston Economic Development. And it's the We Can suite of programming for women entrepreneurship in Canada. And the cool thing that I'm learning about from these women who are taking these entrepreneurship, like basically launching their small business, it's in 2 weeks through my curriculum. And basically what I'm learning from them is that through their settlement agency and language partners, they were able to learn about great programs like Starter Company Plus and other stuff offered through CFDC's, really great business supports. But that there's this like phase 0 of understanding Canadian business and Canadian taxation and what is a sole proprietorship and what are my responsibilities to my employees. There's this sort of phase, like the beginning curriculum, that is not traditionally offered at business development centers. And so if people are able to take their nursing degree from the Philippines and translate it into some type of healthcare spun consultancy or services, the program that they might enter in the rural place or even the city in Kingston is telling this story, that initial, you know, getting in and actually achieving the learning outcomes of those programs is almost impossible for an English language learner, someone who's not just learning to navigate home culture here in Canada, and also sort of like a real base understanding of business practice in Canada. Right? So we have to do a better job at the systems level too, to make our education transferable skills programming more culturally inclusive and culturally appropriate to who's in the classroom. You know, and one of my core objectives working with Kingston Economic Development is to help raise the entire capacity of all of their suites of services for business development and transferable skills identification, so that there doesn't need to be a women newcomer in business program, that they are welcomed and supported and well served in just traditional business development programs, right? And I think that part of the conversation, and I know I'm leaning hard on advocacy and system change and organization change here, but you know, if I hate to quote Ibram X. Kendi right now, but changing minds is not activism. Changing policy is activism. And I think we need to use the partners at this table and the voices at this table to, you know, advocate for huge disruptive shifts in how we serve community, and not making it a newcomer issue, but a Canadian issue, and that every ministry and every funding package and every agency should be mandated to be inclusive. And so this is a huge change in the way that we look at things, but it's a necessary foundational shift to be able to even address this question of credential assessment. If we're not looking at the system when underneath it, we're only laying down band-aids on the symptoms. And so, you know, I think there's a platform here in this group to write some white papers or to figure out ways to affect and influence policy and structure and how funding works and all of that.
Thanks, Shayla. And perhaps we'll just end with George's little story, if you wouldn't mind, George.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'd first introduced myself, I made it clear that I believe that I may have had a different experience from other people that are present today. And when that really hit me hard was before joining Community Futures, I was an account manager for a major financial institution. So one day I had a client who I'd been looking after about 3 years in my office, and it was him and his wife, and they were business owners, a fairly sizable employer in the county, and they were talking about their industry and how immigrants keep undercutting them, and all these immigrant workers are working for less money, and the same nonsense we've been listening to for years. So they kept going on and going on. And at one point I said to them, I need to stop you. You do realise that I'm an immigrant sitting across from you and the things you're saying are quite offensive. And the wife's response to me was, no, sweetheart, you're the right type of immigrant. And that's when I realised that I now have birthplace privilege, that I'm considered the right type of immigrant because there's a large Scottish settlement in Canada. A lot of Scottish blood runs through the families of Canada, and that gives me a privilege above other immigrants. And that never sat well with me. And I also later found out that when I interviewed for the job, the account manager job, that the the manager who had hired me had told our assistant, I don't care if he doesn't have the qualifications, that accent needs to work here. So that was what I was really alluding to when I was saying that I know that I've had a different experience. And I was blind to it for a long time. I just thought everybody stepped off the plane in Canada and everybody opened their arms and welcomed them. And it's sad now that I've had my eyes open to see that it's not the experience. So I just kind of wanted to leave that as a bit of food for thought for any employers that may be on the line today, that when we talk about privilege, there's also a certain level of privilege that comes just by being born in a country that's deemed the right type of country.
Thank you very much, George, and thank you to all of our panelists. I think the discussions that we've had today have really been enlightening. I know I have a full page of notes, and I'm sure many of our participants do as well. So I'll pass it on over to Helen to conclude.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Laura Hannick, our graphic recording artist, who has been taking all our notes. I think it's really important to highlight at this time, you know, what we have the capacity to do from our perspective. I feel like from a personal perspective, I've done enough of these to feel as though the barriers can really weigh us all down. And I think that, you know, I'd like to challenge everybody on the line. Everybody here does some sort of human service. So we are in service to people. And we have so much capacity to be able to make a change locally here in Renfrew and Lanark. I want to point out that there are so many things that we do have. You know, we've alluded to how beautiful it is, the place that we live in. I'd like to highlight the work of Oliver Price, Newcomer Centre of Peel, Lori Beckstead from the YMCA, the other service agencies on the line. You are experts at what you do. And just the fact that you're here tells me that you have more capacity than you did yesterday. It tells me that you have the passion to be part of a change. I want to emphasize to everybody that we didn't look up Oliver, we didn't look up Lori, we didn't look up Louisa. We've been working with many of these folks over the last few years now, and we've learned so much. So we feel like our capacity is growing as well. The Labour Market Group of Renfrew and Lanark has the capacity to highlight the opportunities in the area. The employment agencies on the line have the capacity to highlight the opportunities in the area, to support employers, to ask for help if they need it from the Community Settlement Initiative or the Local Immigration Partnership. All of the work going forward for the LMG cannot be done without our continued partnership with the Community Settlement Initiative, the Local Immigration Partnership, obviously all of the people on the line. So, you know, our next step is to do an action plan, and I challenge you to think about what your capacity is. I challenge you to think about what we have to offer, the things we can change, the things we cannot change. I ask that you sign up for the action plan. The more people we have involved, the better outcomes I believe that we will have. And I want to really thank everybody so much for being here. We will be sending out our presentation, of course. We will share Laura's unbelievable synopsis, graphic synopsis of what we've talked about. And we have deep gratitude for all of you, especially our panelists, for being here today. As many of you know, 11:49, I posted our survey link. You know, we have to do that crazy survey at the end of all of our events. So So unless there's anything to add, I want to thank you all again for being here. If you have any questions, we'll be on the call for a few minutes after, and we invite you to stay and ask those questions if you didn't get a chance. So with that, I'll open it up. We can all wave goodbye to each other and say thanks.